This video was brought to you by Ground News. The modern histories of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda are deeply entwined, and tragically defined by conflict and tension. Despite being the much smaller country, Rwanda has played an outsized role in the DRC's history, with much of this tension being a part of the long shadow of the Rwandan genocide. And for more than a year now, tensions have been persistently high thanks to a renewed offensive in the eastern DRC by the Rwandan-backed M23 rebel group, with the UN pointing out a real risk of direct interstate conflict. Now, quite a bit has changed since our last video on this subject, so this time we'll explain what's going on in the DRC, Rwanda's involvement in the conflict, and the risk of things escalating further. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. To understand what's going on, we're going to begin in Rwanda in 1994. Over the course of 100 or so days, ethnic Hutu militias killed some 800,000 ethnic Tutsis and moderate Hutus, with the genocide only ending after a Tutsi rebel group fought and took control of the country, prompting more than 2 million Hutus to flee to the eastern DRC. Then, in 1996, Rwanda led an invasion of the DRC, seeking to root out the remaining extremists responsible for the genocide who had sought refuge across the border. This invasion sparked the First Congo War, which by 1997 saw the country's dictator toppled and replaced by his long-term opponent Laurent Kabila, who had the backing of Rwanda and its allies. This relationship did not last though, and Kabila ordered Rwandan and other foreign troops out of the country in 1998, setting in motion the devastating Second Congo War, also known as the Great War of Africa for its scale, destructiveness, and the involvement of 9 countries. Amid the turmoil, Kabila himself was assassinated in 2001, with his son Joseph taking over. And by 2003, the war had finally come to an end, as peace agreements were implemented. While the interstate war had come to an end, conflict in the eastern DRC persisted due to the presence of a significant number of armed groups and militias in places like the Ituri province and North and West Kivu. 2012 even saw the founding of a new rebel group in eastern DRC called M23, formed by ex-members of another Tutsi-dominated militia that had signed a peace agreement with the DRC government 3 years earlier. In 2012 and 2013, M23 launched a major rebellion in North Kivu, which was eventually put down by the Congolese army and UN forces, who drove the group out of the country. However, M23 re-emerged in 2022 with a new and ongoing offensive in North Kivu, which has once again seen them seize large swaths of territory, displacing a huge number of people while also reigniting tensions between Rwanda and the DRC. That's because the Congolese government has long accused Rwanda of supporting M23, a charge which Rwanda denies. But UN experts have cited solid evidence of Rwandan support, and even countries friendly to Rwanda, like the US and those in the EU, have said that the Rwandan government does indeed provide support for M23. A UN expert's report from earlier this year stated that Rwanda's goal was to reinforce M23 by providing them with troops and material, and to use them to secure control over mine sites, gain political influence in the DRC, and to decimate FDLR, which is a Hutu-dominated, anti-Rwandan government rebel group active in eastern DRC, with alleged support from the Congolese government. The eastern DRC, by the way, is rich in valuable resources like gold, tin, coltan, and tungsten, and other materials crucial to the global economy, over which more than 100 different rebel groups fight for control. Now, for around 6 months this year, there was a lull in fighting thanks to a shaky ceasefire with the M23. But as we noted in our last video on the subject, the UN said in June that the disengagement from fighting appeared to be temporary and tactical, aimed mainly at buying time amid mounting international pressure. adding that the group's offensive repositioning raised fears that hostilities could flare up again at any moment. Sadly, this turned out to be prescient, as in October, fighting broke out once again between M23 rebels, the DRC, and its allied militias. The renewed fighting is reportedly some 20 kilometers away from the provincial capital of Goma, which a decade ago was briefly captured by M23 during their last offensive. At the end of November, the UN said that more than 450,000 people have been displaced in parts of North Kivu in just the previous 6 weeks due to the renewed conflict, which had already displaced 1 million people already. And that's just a fraction of the more than 5.5 million people that have been displaced across the DRC's eastern provinces by a range of conflicts, not just involving M23, but also other groups, including CODECO, the Islamist ADF, and the Islamic State-linked ISCAP. Another big development since our last video is that the conflict in eastern DRC is undergoing a significant realignment, owing to the evolving, or perhaps devolving, role of international forces. For decades, the United Nations has maintained a peacekeeping mission in the eastern DRC, but the Congolese government has ordered the 15,000 or so UN peacekeepers to withdraw from the country, saying that they've been unable to control rebellions, resolve armed conflicts, and protect civilian populations. And the relationship between the DRC and this UN mission had been tense for a while now. At the end of August, anti-UN protests in Goma saw a reported 43 people killed during clashes with local security forces. At the same time, an East African community force is beginning to withdraw from the country too, having fallen out of favour with the Congolese government just a year after being deployed to support Congolese troops in stabilising the eastern region. Instead, the DRC has accused the East African Community Force of cohabiting with M23 rebels rather than suppressing them. So, with 2 international forces on the way out, the Congolese government in mid-November signed an agreement with the Southern African Development Community, or SADC, to deploy a force in the eastern DRC to support the Congolese army in fighting and eradicating M23 and other armed groups that continue to disrupt peace and security in the DRC. Obviously, it remains to see how this will end up going, but given how the UN and East African missions went, it wouldn't be a shock if the goodwill between the DRC and SADC force is short-lived. As for tensions in Rwanda, the 2 countries continue to trade accusations of hostile actions. Meanwhile, the United States has seemingly taken a more active role in trying to reach a détente, especially as the DRC prepares to hold elections in late December, a significant challenge for a country racked by internal conflict and home to more than 100 million people. But as the UN warned in October, the risk of direct confrontation between the DRC and Rwanda is very real, adding that the military reinforcement on both sides, plus the absence of a direct high-level dialogue and the persistence of hate speech, are all worrying signals that we cannot ignore. But if you do want to follow what happens next in this story, then you should check out our sponsor Ground News, a website and app developed by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. Every day, Ground News ingests over 50,000 articles from all over the world, and every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the sources doing the reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organisations. For example, here's a story about the fact that Britain is giving £290 million to Rwanda in order to send migrants there. Right away, you can see that this specific story has 12 outlets reporting on it. 27 of them lean to the left, while 46 lean right. Every story also comes with a detailed view of the bias distribution, factuality scores, and even specific ownership information. You can also swipe through some of the headlines to get a more detailed understanding of how reporting might change based on political bias. But my favourite feature has to be their new Bias Insights feature, which highlights specific differences in left-leaning and right-leaning reporting. And they even offer complete timelines for some of the more complicated issues going on. Their coverage of the Israel-Palestine conflict breaks down the major stories as they emerge and allows you to track the political bias in real time. Genuinely, Ground News is such a useful tool for our current media landscape, and I can't recommend it enough. In fact, if you subscribe today, you'll get 30% off their Vantage plan. That's under $6 a month for unlimited access to every incredible Ground News feature. And that offer is only available right here. So make sure that you go to ground.news/TLDR or click the link in the description to get started and support an independent news platform working to make the media landscape more transparent.